Welcome to another edition of Birds of a Feather. This is your girl AJ, the Suburban Princess here, back with 5 questions. For anyone who wants to listen to this podcast specifically for sports, that's fine and good. But I did this specifically as a female in sports because there's so few of us who really actually like the sport and like to learn about it. So I'm so glad that I got one of my famous peeps that I'm trying to get to know on Twitter. Kelly, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And I do 5 questions just because like I like to, pick people's brains, see what's all afloating. So I usually kind of open an icebreaker with, because now we're in the new year and we're 13 days in, I was going to kind of lament about 2020, but I decided it's just easier to ask people, how did you view 2020 in a year in like one word, if you could sum it up?
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
I think that the one thing I took away most was, and this will be my word, I guess, listening, because I've always been a very talkative person, a very social person. I'm a hugger. If I ever met you in person, I would hug you. And so huggers are not okay. We have not had the ability to really interact and be social beings like we are so used to. So taking that step back and then listening and trying to heed the advice of everybody who is in the science profession about how serious everything was. Actually, when I first I was living in New Jersey, in North Jersey, at the time that everything started shutting down, but I had just moved into New York City. So I was moving from North Jersey into the city. It was like a dream of mine to live in the city. And literally the week that I moved all of my things into my apartment in New York, the lockdown happened. So I was completely isolated from anything. I wasn't able to go anywhere, wasn't able to do anything, barely was able to go outside without wearing a mask because it was so serious in New York City specifically.
Right.
But then, like every night at 7:00, the shift change happened for the nurses, and the whole city of New York was just cheering. And like just listening to that like gave me a little bit of hope and calm. So listening was really, really a key thing for me, because as I thought about it, I thought, what can I learn? Like, what can I take away from this like crazy situation? And I thought to myself, there were plenty of people saying how serious this was before I moved into New York. I could have postponed that move potentially if I had just listened. It was so serious in China. We really hadn't got a grasp of it until March of last year. But if I had just paid attention, if I had more awareness, if I listened, maybe I wouldn't be in this position, but I'm going to take away that maybe I should listen better, more clearly, more thoughtfully. And so when I started my podcast, my goal was to listen, ask questions and listen, and build back up a little bit of the social aspect of my life that was missing. And I'm sure it's very much the same of what you were thinking with your show and the concept of your episodes. So
yeah, absolutely. That's a great word
on needing that social interaction.
That's what it is, because like you said, as soon as you said hugger, that's the first thing that I thought about after the summer kind of came and went last year, is that you do miss just a little intricacies of a hug. Now, mind you, I've been back home with my mother from living in Mount Airy for about 5 years. And so as much as I love my mom, it's like, you've been around your mom long enough, you're just kind of like,
trust me, I know.
So, and it's one of those situations too that, absence does make the heart grow fonder, but until you're actually in a quarantine, now mind you, if I was by myself without having to hug my mom all year, now I would feel some type of way. So I'm glad that I even have her. So I'm blessed there. But that is a good word, because listening is what this quarantine has forced everyone to do, because you couldn't do anything. You couldn't be as free as you wanted to. And now it's sort of it is coming into 2021, but I feel a little bit more hopeful that because of the awareness and the situations that are starting to become more clear, if we're mature enough as a country to not be as hard-headed as we've been, maybe this year will be easy to navigate a little more.
Absolutely.
But I'm not expecting miracles, but whatever.
So you just gotta take the lessons as they come, because in this particular situation, there weren't very many positives to having to be alone and do all of these terrible things where you really were isolated from the rest of the world. You didn't have anywhere to go. So if you're able to find, like I always say, like trying to find a silver lining to something, like you're trying to learn, you're trying to gain perspective, like hopefully everybody is taking something away and not just making it poor me, poor me, poor me. Learn from it, try to grow, and I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, not even a soapbox, because honestly, everything you're saying is what everyone at some point, unless you're terribly hard-headed, had to come to that realization. Like, it wasn't all about you. This required a lot of community, whether it be virtually or not.
Absolutely.
So next question, I just want to move to, since you brought up the podcast, me personally, I did a podcast because of that reason, but I also did it because I did have a dream at one point in my life to be involved in sports or TV on some level, and I didn't know what. What motivated you to do your podcast?
So I've always had an interest. I graduated from college with a communications and journalism degree.
Nice.
So I always had that innate interest in sports journalism, I guess you could say, but I never pursued it. So I just always was on Twitter and interacting with fans and talking about the Eagles. And I actually got contacted by the guys at Eagles Brawl, which is where my podcast is located. It's a show on their podcast. So they reached out to me, said, we really want a female voice. We think you would be great. And we're hoping that you would consider starting a show on our podcast. And I took that very seriously because, like you, I don't want to represent women poorly. So I'm going to be my hardest critic whenever it comes to the things that I'm putting out there. And I was really nervous. Like, I didn't know how people would receive it, how I would even do it. Would I have a co-host? Would I have guests, or would I just talk myself? Like, how would I arrange everything? And I, took some time to think about it. I had been involved with the Fourth and John podcast when it was starting out. So I was talking to Gail actually during the process of considering doing it. And he was like, you would be great. Like, stop overthinking it. And if you really want to do it, then go and, try your best to create a new lane, or potentially just, bring in different perspectives and new conversation. And so my goal was not to make it, although I thought it was very important, my goal wasn't to make it, I'm a female talking about sports. I wanted it to be, women know sports. Right. Like, Kay Adams is killing it on the NFL Network as the host every single day. Yep. She's probably the first person I would think of to get advice from on fantasy football. And she's a female. And she doesn't have to say she's a female. She just knows her stuff, and people really depend on her knowledge. And there's so many women in the industry that you can point to. I spoke with Lisa Salters from ESPN, and she's from Philadelphia area. I spoke to Colleen Wolfe. Yep. So to Jennifer.
I love Colleen.
So these women have these very unique perspectives, and I was so honored that they were willing to come on. I literally just reached out to them on Twitter and was like, would you be willing to come on my show? I had no episodes to show them what it was going to be like, but I wanted it to be thoughtful questions, interesting questions, something that listeners could take something away from. And it didn't always need to be about the Eagles. Sometimes you just flat out don't want to talk about them because they are
absolutely
miserable. But there's always that innate interest in the birds. So you get some questions in at the end about the team and where we can go and how we can correct the things that are going wrong, and getting some voices like that, having questions posed by a woman, I think is different than what you might get otherwise. So it was really a thought process to get it to where it is today. I think people think, oh, well, Kelly just does interviews for her podcast. And, I've had fans on to talk about the team, for a couple of episodes, and done a couple of debates about everything that's going on with the team. So you get like a sense of what you would normally hear on the radio, but you can get some more in-depth answers than you would typically get on a segment for the radio. So trying to, start this process as well as I can. I hope it looks like I know what I'm doing, but I really don't.
Well, you know what? It's good. It's good that you even admit that you're being nervous about it, because it is scary. And I can imagine people, like, at least you have a degree. I pursued telecommunication, I can't talk, broadcasting telecommunications at Temple at one point, but I never finished because at the time I was full time and I wasn't able to do the core classes in the morning. So it was kind of a conflict. So I never finished. But it is one of those things that it's still tied into my dream as a child back when TRL was big and I wanted to be a VJ. So it's kind of still in that same lane of wanting to be in this kind of TV / lane that I knew, pop culture, sports. So it kind of, you notice everything now is kind of NFL entertainment. So it's like everything kind of goes hand in hand. And I just think it's refreshing, especially in a podcast. Well, now at this time in quarantine, podcast honestly is the best way to do it, to reach out. And I mean, the only thing I've been able to do since I've done this podcast and decided to go YouTube with it is get, I just interviewed Mickey Duran, who was part of the show called Roundhouse that I loved growing up. And that was probably the biggest get I've gotten thus far. So when I saw you with Lisa Salters, I was like, damn, I was like, who does Kelly know? But I
don't know anyone.
And that's the thing. Like, I mean, but I feel like there's something about you. I think that your presence, and I think that just even seeing you face to face now, because I've never met you personally, but I feel like you know what you want to do. And I think maybe it's worth a shot to try it, especially if they probably haven't been asked by many people from our area since, Colleen or all these people. Like, I listen around around an NFL podcast, and I always love when they bring Colleen on, because I always feel like she's a nice neutral presence amongst all those men. And it's funny because she's very, very, she's like raw, she's Philly. So it's like, she's very cool. But I've always liked, MJ Acosta from NFL Network kind of coming into the forefront with the show Weekly at Night. And then it really started with, who would I say? Jamel Hill. Jamel Hill was my main motivation for even wanting to have that desire to even look into sports journalism. But I feel like it's hard because, you have a degree. I always feel like, is it something you can even be taken seriously for just having a podcast as opposed to having a degree? And do people have enough respect to even bother letting you, bother them with a DM and just say, can I ask you a few questions?
Listen, I think every time I hear you on sports radio, you sound just as capable as any of the hosts. So don't
you listen. Oh, that's so cool. You heard me. Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Jeff Mosher, actually, it just popped in my head. I just realized he did my podcast one time on the on Spotify, and I love that he even did that. Like, I know he's tired because Jeff Mosher works like nonstop, and I've been trying to pursue him again for this venue now. So I'm like, I'm not expecting an answer right away. As you grew up in this kind of like with this desire to do this, did you play sports in high school, or was it just something that in the back of your mind, you're like, I love sports, but I was never like a top basketball player or a volleyball player or anything like that? Did you actually have something you played in high school, or was it just a love?
I was never the top athlete, so I will say that much. I literally did every sport possible in grade school. Softball, basketball, I did cheerleading. I did, if that's considered a sport, we did competition. So I'll consider it a sport.
Yeah.
Lots of gymnastics. I did dancing when I was younger. And then when I got to high school, I did cross country. So I ran like 6 miles sometimes. I was just like a crazy person. I didn't even know what I was doing. I just loved being active. I loved the team aspect of sports. And then I joined the crew team, which is huge in Philadelphia. We were out of the Vesper Boathouse. Yes. If people know it.
Yes.
So waking up at 4:00 in the morning, going to Philly, putting the boat out on the water and, rowing up and down the Schuylkill River all morning, getting ready for school and going to school, having a part-time job after school, waking up doing it the next day. So when I got into sports, I think that's where I really clicked with football because it's such a team-oriented sport. And also my dad is a huge football fan.
Mm-hmm.
So when you would finally have like Sundays to be calm, like you didn't have much going on Sundays after like games on the weekdays and
Yes.
all the craziness that you had to deal with sports. On Sundays, that was like our day to like hang out with the family. So it was a really big bonding experience that really pushed me into loving the Eagles and football.
Yeah, same, because that's the only reason I had no choice in that sense, because being in a house with me and my older sister who was not interested at all until she went to FSU, but my dad was always screaming at the TV and he was always
Yeah.
angry, as you know. I think that honestly, even before the year the Eagles went to the Super Bowl, that's when I started kind of tuning into what he was fussing about. And his disappointment, because that was happened to be the same year my sister was giving birth to her same child, and her husband is stationed in the military and they were in Italy. So we were on a
Wow.
plane the day of the Super Bowl. And it was killing me that I wasn't home watching with my dad because we had watched the NFC Championship together. And so, yeah, you're right. Like when you're in a house that became your thing on Sundays, it's like it was very weird. You know, a lot of things changed after that. My parents got divorced, whatever, but my love became my hobby, my obsession,
Mm-hmm.
something to snap me out of depression growing up. So it's like
Absolutely.
it definitely became an escape. And I feel like for the mental, even though now I'm starting to realize how our fans can really drive things to a mental point. Um, do
Yep.
you feel like sports became an escape, obviously in quarantine this year, especially with even the delay of sports?
I was probably at the front of the line when it came to begging for the football season to happen. Like I was like, please do it if it's safe. Please do it
Yeah,
if it's safe. I didn't want anybody to put themselves in harm's way, of course. So I was gonna be super understanding if they were like, look, this is not gonna happen. But like all signs seem to point to them trying to make it work and happen. And players got to opt out if they didn't want to play. And so I felt like the protocols were put in place and I felt a little comfortable with it. I wasn't sure if the whole season was going to happen. So I was kind of like holding my breath,
me too.
getting excited about it. Um, but then we lost week 1 and I was like,
You were like,
here
me,
we
was this
go.
smart?
Here we go.
Right.
The thing that was such a bummer about this season, and I've said this a couple of times, but it just goes like through my brain like several times in a day. You just like have the same thought. This is
Mm-hmm.
it goes through my head. Doug Pederson had a returning coaching staff for this year,
Mm-hmm.
and like how was the football team more prepared for week 1 with the like minimal off season that we've had and no preseason? How was Ron Rivera able to get his guys ready enough to beat us week 1 when we've had the same schemes, like a few new guys coming in?
Seriously.
Largely, we should have been like, we've been here before, we
Right.
played together, like we've got this. Obviously, injuries are a killer reoccurring history for this team. So to answer your question in a very long way,
I love it.
they were a diversion. They were a distraction from the real world, but it wasn't necessarily a good one.
You're gonna say that. That's why I said the same thing. I'm sure we probably tweeted it randomly. All of us females were probably sitting there like, the hell
Why
did
did
we
we want
ask
this?
for? Why?
I mean, I still kind of feel like it was necessary to go through that pain. Like I'm kind of a glutton for punishment. Any Eagles fan probably is.
All are.
Um, Otherwise he probably would have switched to a new team by now.
Yeah, we would have been a Cowboys fan.
But this team just, they had so much going wrong the past 2 years and nothing was really addressed. So maybe this was the gut punch that we all needed to snap back into reality and start addressing some of the problems for the future.
Here's the problem, though. Okay, so my next question is going to be my Achilles heel is listening to the national pundits always have these general sweeping accusations of Philadelphia sports, really towards the Eagles. I don't know if you really caught it. I'm sure you did because you sound like me. You kind of observe things quickly. I felt like it was almost like this whole vibe that of all the people to be fired first, I really thought that Howie Roseman would be on the cutting block, because it
Yes.
seemed like even the pundits, the correspondents, even that last, like, what was it, Monday or Sunday night game, that even Louis Riddick was going at him. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking like,
Yeah.
dang, nobody's hiding there. So I just thought the detachment and the obvious disconnection between ownership and what's going on with this team needs to be like put under a magnifying glass, because they're
Mm-hmm.
going to keep repeating the same mistakes even after
Yeah.
Doug's firing, which didn't shock me. I was kind of actually happier for Doug, because I thought Doug needs to be somewhere where he feels like he has the respect of an organization behind him and not trying to make him turn into this talking puppet. And I think that's what they thought he was going to do, you know. And I don't want to think of the Super Bowl as a oops that just happened thing.
Right.
Like, I really think everything was working because it was supposed to. They were just
We had the stars align, all of the right
basically.
coordinators, all of the right coaches, all of the right talent from free agency. We drafted
Hmm.
pretty well. I mean, Barnett still performed late on in that year to
Yep.
help us win that Super Bowl. He literally caught the fumble. So
Literally was the guy that
um,
was right there helping.
everybody was contributing. Everything was a team aspect mentality, and we've lost that. I think we lost that, and so the thing that concerns me is that Lurie had this press conference the other day that was so long, and he said nothing I wanted to hear.
Nothing. He could
Like,
have nipped that in the bud.
if he just said, I acknowledge that we've been poorly drafting and done some bad things in the front office part, like, it's not all on Doug. And I know that he's trying to make it seem like Howie isn't terrible, but
I caught that a lot. I was
we're
like,
smart enough to know better. Like,
what?
just talk to us straight. Like, if you're gonna
Please.
say that Howie's here,
It's so insulting.
that he is not the one picking draft picks, or he's got to do better, or he's gonna be on the line too. Like, it just feels like Howie just gets this free pass all the time. He's either with the Chip Kelly era, like in a back corner somewhere where he knows where he is, but not gone.
You could tell even on Twitter
He
that
gets
people
to
were,
rule this the whole
yes, Halo.
nation.
He's a halo around him. I feel like everybody was trying to say that Chip was right. And I want to be like, all right, I don't want to be that extreme, but you do kind of think now, is Lori not intimidating enough to make the point known that it's like, you got one more shot, buddy? Because
I hope he is. I hope that's happening behind closed doors.
right.
I didn't get that sense from the press conference, which, like, maybe he just doesn't want to throw his guys under the bus, but he sure wasn't helping Doug Pederson. I mean, we were literally hearing step by step along the process that he was going to have a meeting
Mm-hmm.
this week and he was going to have a meeting this week. And so by the time the meeting came this week, I was like, Doug's getting fired. Know it. Like, he's getting fired today.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad because he's the first coach to ever win a Super Bowl for the Eagles, and you disrespect him by not keeping that all in-house. Like, I don't care that you fired him necessarily, because I thought maybe it was time to try a new thing.
Yeah.
I'm not mad about that. I'm mad that you literally told us, like, through the media every single day, Doug's on the hot seat for this, Doug's on the hot seat for that, Doug's doing this, Doug's doing that, he's going to go have a meeting with Lori here and there. So I just wish that the organization would prove to a future head coach that they would be respected. And I don't think that we've done a good job from our front office ownership's perspective of proving that that's the case for the next guy.
I really feel like they should make use of PR next year. Like, I feel like there's a media coaching that, because we never had this much leakage with Andy Reid. Like, we would never have a clue. Like, half the reason why the media got on his nerve was because they had to create crap, because he would never let stuff slip.
And you don't hear anything from the Chiefs.
You wouldn't even know because I forgot Shady's on the team still. So it's like, Shady obviously should retire, but do you hear anybody dissing him publicly? You don't hear anything leaking out about him or him not getting along, or you haven't heard anything bad about them since the whole Tyreek Hill situation that almost got his butt out. But at the same time, you're right. I do feel like it's really annoying that this stuff has come out so publicly and so it's just messy. Like I'm not used to this organization being
dysfunctional.
very dysfunctional, and it's not cool because I think even E-Rock posted the tweet out the other night. Like, don't y'all think it's weird that it's just we look so unprofessional in the public eye, considering we won the Super Bowl 3 years ago?
Right.
And you know, a lot of people probably worried, as I did, that it would be the kiss of death for us to win, because then we would rest on our laurels, and then everybody would be like, "Ah, we're cool, we won." You know,
Well, that was
no wonder.
kind of what Jeffrey Lurie did in his press conference. He was talking about moving, like having a difference in opinion about the future of the Eagles, right? With Doug, they had a differing opinion on what the direction of the team was. And then he gets asked questions, like hard-hitting questions, and he goes back to, well, 2017, like,
Don't lie.
If you're looking to the future, then look to it.
Right.
Like, we see through that right away as a fan base. We're smart enough to know better. So,
and that's the thing. You have
stop
to
trying.
Error. Like you either have a very detached view of reality, or I'd rather you just even say, I don't know what the future is going to bring. You know, I really honestly just hope I can somehow contribute, if I need to make this organization better. You know, because I pride myself on wanting to go back to the Super Bowl and hold up another Lombardi. Like, I feel like even the GMs and coaches of other teams have spoken in less, like the eighth of the time that Lurie took. Like, I looked up and it was on mute, and I was like, he's still talking. I was like,
yeah,
why
it's very long.
Talking? And I felt bad. Like, I even took TikTok because I just wanted to show like my embarrassment. I like had my shades on and my hood pulled. I'm like, I don't know what's going on with this cup. And it's sad because you feel like you have to be mourning, and you know, it's just not appropriate. But my last question will be also to so the future. So I feel like at this point, especially as us females know, I feel like there needs to be a movement of women in either front office positions, because we see the little movement of female referees. We see female assistant coaches, even in NBA, you know, that lady that I forgot her name, forgive me, but she took over for Popovich. And, you know, I just feel like there needs to be more of that. Do you think it would make a difference, especially in the new season, if the Eagles even entertain the idea of some female presence in a female office position, or even a coach?
Well, I know for a fact that we have several females in the Eagles front office right now. They're not at like the higher up level that we would visibly see them and know what their involvement is with the team. We have, I think, Jennifer Kavanaugh is in the PR department, and a couple of our scouts are female, I'm pretty sure. But I do think it will make an impact for teams to be bringing in these female perspectives and views of a player, because there's so much. And I actually did a podcast this past week on the draft, and we spoke to NFL Network's Ben Fennell about these prospects. And something that men cannot necessarily see as well as women is emotional, personal connections to these players. Like, I'm not saying women can get a closer look to a man as a prospect, but I'm saying she can tell whether or not a person is ready for the limelight. Like, if they're ready for a big contract, if a person is mature enough to handle this big change in their life. I mean, developmental awareness and knowing a person's particular living situation or circumstance,
emotional intelligence,
background.
Yes.
Like, understanding the person behind the helmet is such a big aspect. I mean, we've seen several times where the only real thing they'll say is, this guy has some red flags off the field.
You're right. It's the same thing.
But it's like, what's the context to that?
Right.
Like, is he going to be available for the team? Is he going to get arrested? Is he
what is his rap
suspended based off of the NFL's standards?
Right.
So, there's so much that I think females could do in aspect of draft evaluation in regards to that specifically, that maybe men are like, well, you seem fine to me. Like,
yeah,
maybe stereotypical to generalize it that way, but I think females have a better sense of a person and what they're going through, what their situation is, versus a guy who is only looking at the X's and O's.
Yeah, the guys are brawn and we're the intuition. We were blessed with the intuition. And I think a woman always knows when someone's not connecting with them. And
Mm-hmm.
like you say, I mean, obviously everything's going to be different probably again this year. Hopefully this year's draft will be more, um, I don't know, I guess well prepared as far as, because, you know, everybody couldn't deal with the sudden, like, oh God, I can't bring people, you know, to the house or whatever to look at them or whatever. So I feel like this draft hopefully will be a lot more interesting other than being just a virtual experiment.
Well, the question is whether the combine will happen.
Sure. That's the issue.
COVID, it's not necessarily like a lock to happen. So if you're not having the pro days, you're not having the combine, you might see a lot of prospects who are either a reach or not necessarily the player that a team might have picked if they had all of that detail, all of the full information, all of the combine drill results. So you're going to have a little less information if those things don't happen. That may prevent a team from taking the guy they might have normally gone for.
I just feel like as stubborn as they, well, I shouldn't even say stubborn, but as, I guess, as thorough as the NFL has wanted to be with the pursuing of the season, regardless, and even all the bumps and bruises, I feel like they might probably take more liberty this year because they seem like they're not trying to be like they're not about protocol, but I think they're really trying to rush, you know, business as usual. So I feel like it will be what you're saying like it was, but I also do feel like they might encourage like a quicker way to do the combine that there doesn't involve too many people. Like there could be half scouts visual and then there could be half scouts actually there so that they're minimizing how many people are actually physically in the particular, and it might be in different locations. Like it might not all just be in Indianapolis. It might, or wherever they had it last time. I think we should just bring it closer. Whatever guys are closer to a certain state, keep them in that unit, keep them quarantined for 14 days, then start.
Makes sense.
So I mean, but you're right.
I'm sure those conversations are happening at the NFL level, and hopefully they have women to organize all that.
Look, you and me both. The more we're talking, you would think we trying to audition ourselves for a job. It's like,
you can do it.
Hello,
I'm game.
I'm game too. Shoot, give me a list. I'll give a list of players. I'll plan out all the guys that are, well, especially I'm really interested in even getting to learn some more of these not even just the wide receivers, but the cornerbacks, because I feel like that's what the Eagles need to focus on, because that has been a broken system since B-Dog left us. So it's like we
need somebody to pair with Slay so badly, because it was so evident that they were avoiding his side of the field anytime that he was on somebody. They'd be like, all right, well, not going that way.
No, we're gonna go expose
anywhere else.
Avante and whoever else was 10 times smaller. But that's another player too. I mean, I'm gonna do another pod with my friend Eddie, and we're gonna talk about who we think needs to stay and go, because I'm mixed about some of the defense players that should stay or should go, because I feel like there's some guys also that were put in positions they didn't belong in, like Avante specifically. Like that's not a strong suit, and that's why I think he was a liability this year. Cravon, like I don't think they fully used Cravon the way he could be used.
Right.
That's a whole nother thing, but I thank you just for doing this, and I think as a female, it's very good, and hopefully it'll be something that they'll take to mind, and that's why I post it everywhere, so that maybe I can just get this snippet and just have, you know, hint, hint, Eagles, women know what we're talking about. So, and if there's anything you want to ask me, feel free, and if not, you know where I can be. You can always tweet me, and you know, if you want to do this.
I have 2 questions.
Go ahead.
So we just heard the news that the Sixers did not trade for James Harden. What was your reaction to the Nets trade for James Harden?
I was so happy.
You didn't want him?
I didn't want him because I don't think that he's as motivated like he used to be. I agree he's a great shooter, but people have to understand that sometimes not getting what we want is probably the best thing for this team. I understand the frustration with Ben, but I stopped setting myself up to believe he was going to be this shooter after last season, because I feel like it's obviously too much of a pressure for him. And if he does do it, he only does it when there's a weaker defense against him. And that means he won't do it often, but they're going to get tried with it. And obviously the other night was the proof that he's not going to think about doing that. I think that James is better off in Brooklyn anyway because he has an attitude, and I think that KD was the first person who wanted him to come, obviously, because he just tweeted after it happened. So I think it looks good for Brooklyn, but I know Tyrone from 97.5 was kind of debating me. He's like, I need an apology. I said, no. I said, because I told you I think he should go to the Nets, and don't you know they made the deal? So, but that's my opinion. I think he's better off there. It was a huge, obviously, trade. I mean, there's obviously questions about where these other guys are going to end up, but I mean, or how it's going to work. But Oladipo kind of shocked me that they moved him to the Rockets. Like that kind of shocked me. But I like him too, though. But I'm still praying for Bradley Beal. I just feel like he doesn't need to be in the Wizards anymore. I feel like he could come here, but that might invite Ben. You know, either way, if you get a big name, you're going to sacrifice Ben more than you're going to sacrifice anybody else. So.
Yeah, I was seeing the timeline just going through like this emotional roller coaster.
Oh my God.
I'm so glad that I really only like football because I handle more emotion. Like,
oh, you see the bombs dropping. Like
I was Sixers plus other teams, I would just not be able to handle all the emotions I'd have.
I'm telling you, 4 for 4 is overrated in the sense if you want to be stressed out times 4, but I see it. You know, I will always have a love for the Sixers since Allen Iverson days because obviously that's what I grew up on. But you're right. It's very hard to find people to be really focused on all 4. I'm just now learning about hockey. Like this is the only Flyers thing I have. And then I think I got the Stadium Series because I actually watched that game and it was actually pretty fun to watch because it was outside. Which I can do again this year. But yeah, like I'm still interested in hockey. It's kind of hard because it's not something I naturally gravitate to, but I think the connecting is a babe. So it's like part of me is kind of just watching it for him. Even though they're covered most of the time, but still, I think he's cute. But yeah, so that's my answer. Like I was happy. I think that I think if you have a motivated Embiid, that makes the team a lot stronger. If he's not focused, and you see what happens when he kind of looks mosey and pouts and gets sick and not motivated. Now he's a little he's thinner, and I think he's also motivated now because he's a father, and I think he also sees the end of the road with this team if they follow his lead. So they just have to trust each other.
I'm with you. The second question I had, there's so many names out there right now for the Eagles on who will be the next head coach. Of the people who have been named, as potential head coaches for the future of the team, who's the most intriguing to you?
I definitely feel like Deuce would be a priority because he just seems tough. And from all the footage they've shown from the Super Bowl year, the way he was handling the running backs and just in general, when he was making fun of Boston Scott when he turned and he thought it was the slowest turn ever.
It's like they went to commercial break and he was still turning.
And he was like, no. So I feel like at this point, you just need to stop the nice guy act. And I want a tough coach. I want a coach who's accountable. I want a coach that actually is willing to answer questions directly. I'm sick of the generic answers. Like I understand there's sometimes they can't really be direct, but I feel like Deuce has the history. He was one of our best running backs. I feel more trustworthy since I know that they're not really big risk takers anymore at this point, that Deuce is the safe bet. But if they do for whatever reason, if the Chiefs are no longer in the playoffs, which I doubt, but then Bieniemy might come into play because of the tree with Doug and Kansas City and Andy. But and then other than that, I'm more interested in the DC coordinator if the guy from 49ers, Saleh.
Yeah, Saleh.
Yeah, Saleh. I think if he is a candidate, which I personally I doubt because I feel like he likes 49ers, but if he comes here, that would be awesome. We just need attitude on the sidelines. We need guys that are like no BS, do your job, because some of the reason why I think even all these Philly teams have problems sometimes with players is they don't hold them accountable.
Yeah.
And it's almost
they want to be their friend and not their
coach. Yeah, the hands-off thing is not my cup of tea anymore because us fans are smart and we can see through that. You know, you can't make it like even just last night on Inside Sixers Outsiders, Crystal just took Ben to task because her whole thing was like, yo, I can't be nice anymore. Like it's getting to the point where Joe sits down and Tobias isn't playing. You are the next up and you're not taking it. You got a rookie outplaying you, way more motivated than you. So, but yeah, out of those coaching jobs, I would think that those guys are the biggest names. I'm sure more are going to keep dumping out. I know they keep pumping the
Yeah.
Riley guy, but I don't know. I
I
feel
don't
like
see I don't see that one happening. I definitely am on board with Deuce, just because I think so many players have come out and been vocal that he would be a great person to fill the role because I mean, like Garrett Blunt said it right after the Super Bowl that he thought Deuce Staley would be a great head coach someday. And several years removed from that Super Bowl, we're looking for a head coach. So if you want somebody that the locker room will really respond to and believe in and trust, I think he makes total sense. And then you can also bring in an offensive coordinator, potentially somebody that would call plays or has experience calling plays if Deuce is willing to give that role to somebody else that, is a perk. Having an offensive coordinator to have that chance to start, calling plays and things like that would be an alluring option. And we got Frank Reich from, being fired, and he had head coaching experience. Like Schwartz came in with head coaching experience. Like we had guys under him, Pederson, who had the experience to help him along the way.
Right.
That I think that benefited us a lot. Sorry, Frank Reich wasn't a head coach; he was an offensive coordinator. But the same thing.
He became a head coach.
He had a similar role elsewhere, and he could handle the role under Pederson, who was taking on a job as a pretty fresh face to the coaching world. So if Deuce is, serious and the interview process is serious and the, ownership feels it's the right fit, I would not be opposed to Deuce being the head coach whatsoever.
And it'd be just faster and easier. And even though, Lori was trying to paint this picture, they were going to take so much time. I'm like, you're not doing it. There are some people here that are going to be snatched up next week if they don't, move.
Yeah, we're late.
We're late, so I'm saying
late.
So as soon as he said that, I'm like, no, dude, you clearly don't get it. Like we have to look now. But yeah, if they do get Deuce, I think it makes more sense. And I feel like you said, the OC is important because the head coach has too many things to pay attention to. And I think what Doug was not willing to do, which obviously showed his bottom line at that point, was he wasn't willing to compromise yet another thing that he probably had been compromising before, unbeknownst to us, until he got fired. And I think that was the final straw because I didn't understand why he was so obstinate about letting somebody try. I mean, Matt Nagy and the Bears, he gave it opportunity to have somebody else call.
Well, if you don't bring in an offensive coordinator, you can't really delegate.
Right.
So he was making wrong decisions since before the season even began.
Oh, come on. Everybody kind of, you don't have to be really totally an analytics person to see the obvious bad decisions during, if not 2-minute drills before halftime or even in the fourth quarter, that you kind of like, we were doing so well before with this. What happened? And I don't care what anybody says, whether or not he gave it to Press Taylor at times or not. I don't believe any of that. I believe that his whole thing was that was his last thing that he could do on his own. And he wanted to prove that he didn't need an OC. And I'm like, he failed. I'm sorry. And lastly,
you can't have your franchise quarterback become a bottom 5 quarterback in the league and expect them to let you hire the passing offensive coordinator as your OC. Like that doesn't even make sense, Doug. Like it almost feels like he wanted to get fired with that suggestion.
Well, at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't care what you say, whether Carson got along with him at all. You notice Carson hasn't said jack because Carson's not dumb enough to put himself in a position where, one, he could look like a hypocrite. 2, he could look like he wasn't, he's jumping to conclusions. 3, not even realizing like he had 5 years to get his act together. So he probably on his own merit, because he probably is hard on himself, I'm sure, is like, I'm not trying to put anything out there. There was a paper trail.
It was a lose-lose situation for him to speak at this point. We didn't know then what would happen or transpire in the weeks to come. So why should he?
And why would you speak anyway? Because like you said, if you don't know what the heck's going on, why would you speak?
Right.
Because you put further gas on the fire. And I feel like you said, I think he's a man of substance, that to the point where he's like, I really pride myself on not looking like an idiot. So I'm not going to put stuff out there to be like, just to say something.
I didn't question him whatsoever with not wanting to speak.
I didn't, but you notice the media was all hot and bothered, especially local media. And I'm just like,
they would love to talk to him. They would love to get a story about him.
Oh, I'm sure, but he didn't start.
Why would he do that?
Why? Well, he wasn't even playing the rest of the season. So what is his statement? You want to hear more from Jalen Hurts than him, because Jalen was the one who was actually on the field.
Right.
And, you know, at this point, I mean, nothing he does, like you said, is lose, because you notice everybody's starting to analyze him a little harder now. Like he suddenly became this Dark Knight. And I want to be like, when the heck did his reputation just go down since he started playing bad? Like, I'm trying to understand what else he did off the field that pissed people off, because I feel like now you're just reading your own assumptions of him. He didn't give us enough he didn't give us enough material to judge him outside of the field. And I feel like now, if you don't like Carson because of what you think's happening, then you didn't like him before. You know? Yes, he pissed me off.
Let's just all agree as a fan base. Anybody listening to this, let's just all agree we're gonna let him try to redeem himself instead of pushing him out the door.
Because he has every right to. Me personally, I'm sure you've probably seen me tweet, I would not be shocked if he decided to bail, because I wouldn't trust this organization either. And you look at it this way, I don't think Carson's that type of person. Not saying he doesn't want his money, but I don't think he's the type of person that's going to be hung up by how much money he owes back or whatever, if he's where he wants to be. If he does go to Indianapolis with Frank Reich, tout salud, go ahead. But I'm more like, what are we getting back for him? I'm more for like, someone just threw out today about Deshaun Watson. I would love Deshaun Watson to be our quarterback. But I know realistically that's a whole salary thing, and do they want to do that? But I feel like he's another quarterback that's been gypped in his in his team. So you're right. There are too many revolving quarterback scenarios right now that are in bad situations that everything could change in a blink of a week. So we don't know, because what's the draft in April. So things could flip between now. Everything could be totally gravy between Carson and the organization, for all as we know, in like a month.
Right.
We don't know. I just refuse.
And maybe with the top 6 pick, we will draft a starter.
You know what? Ever since last draft, I'm like,
same.
I don't care about.
I had my heart set on an LSU wide receiver last year, and everybody's in love with Chase this year, and for great reasons. He's a stud.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not gonna fall into the same trap of loving an LSU wide receiver. It fall to pieces.
Nothing everyone's throwing out now, I think, can happen. So I'm all like, nah, sounds great. Yeah.
I'm like, well, Howie's the one drafting, so
I'm about to say, I'm like, so don't even, whatever you think is gonna happen, just stop. Like,
stop thinking.
You know, if it makes you make lists and talk about it every day, that's great. But to me, I'm lessening my stress by even thinking much about the draft right now. Only thing I care about is what's going to happen with Wentz in the organization between now and then. And that's really what I'm worried about. Like, what's going to happen there. And honestly,
we have a lot of drama coming our way, so that'll be a fun distraction from the real world.
Look, with social media, we didn't even know this much in between seasons. So I think it's a blessing and a curse now, because now you do every little thing that like comes out every day. You're like, huh, what? But then part of you's like,
we know too much.
We know too much, and we shouldn't know. I miss Andy Reid just because of just that alone, was that he kept a tight ship. So, but girl, this is why I enjoy you already. I knew that it was smart to even put you on my pod, because I'm like, I definitely have started tuning into your pod, and I appreciate another female voice out there asking the right stuff, putting the good vibes out there. And as an Eagles fan, you know, it's a time of mourning and transition. Yes. But it is a new year, so let's just try to make it as good as we can. And I thank you for joining Birds of a Feather and the 5 question segment. And definitely plug your show, put out there what to expect, where to find you.
Yeah, so the Kelly Green Show is my episodes on the Eagles Brawl podcast. So if you download podcasts at a particular location, it's available there. So Eagles Brawl podcast, and my show specifically will say the Kelly Green Show. We have several different Eagles football, lovers, fans that are producing content for the podcast. And I'm just one of the personalities for that. And I just enjoy speaking about the Eagles and getting to know more people just like AJ. So
and definitely Kelly's holding the torch. So I'm praying that if she does get something with Colleen or anybody that I know of on my list of people, I'm going to be definitely tuning into her podcast so I can be like, what is the trick? So, but it's good to hear women in sports. Thank you, Kelly, for much for your time. Thank you if you were listening. And if you haven't listened to either one of our podcasts before, what are you doing? You can check Spotify, Google Podcasts, any of them. All of them should have them up. It's free. Enjoy it. And Kelly, have a great night. Thank you. Go Birds. Go Flyers. Go
Fly, Eagles, fly.
Fly, Eagles, fly. Take care, girl.
Bye.